Well, welcome back to the show. It's such an honor you decided to spend a few minutes with us here today. And I'm really excited about what you're going to hear and even see today, because on today's episode, we have Brandi Stansbury-Moody. She was born and raised in California, went to college at New York University, and has been a lifelong marketer in the food and beverage industry. And you're going to ask yourself, what does Brandi have to do with law enforcement leadership? Well, she just so happens to be the granddaughter of one of the most legacy-driven men that we've talked about here on the show and in our articles, Rudy DeLeon, former LA police commander. And Brandi reached out to us when we published that article, and I said, listen, we ought to tell these stories to our audience. And she's been very open and honest, and she's wanted to come on the show and talk to you today. And I think it's going to be really exciting. Brandi, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
So I want to just sort of take you back. I mean, you obviously had a pretty unique childhood, and your grandfather was just sort of icon among men there in the Los Angeles area. But and so we'll get into all that. But when you found the article, I don't know how you found it, sort of talk to us about your feelings or emotions and what made you reach out to us.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm kind of a geek when it comes to my family, and I actually have a Google alert set up.
By the way, for a lot of cops listening, I don't recommend that. Just don't know any of that stuff, right? But okay, go ahead, Brandi.
Well, I have to say I have a Google alert set up for myself as well, and I've actually read your article about like your keeping track of like your what people, your reputation and whatnot. So highly recommend you might want to set up a Google alert. But I had a Google alert set up, so that came through. And there's 6 of us grandkids, my mom and my uncle, who are both the children of my grandpa and grandma. There's 6 of us that are really close, consider us like brother and sister relationships. We grew up really close together. So we have a cousins group text. And, I put that out on the group text, and we were just overjoyed. We know all these stories. We always piece them back together. It's been a while since my grandfather passed away. So it's always nice to hear them keep, proliferating and keep, to keep hearing people talk about him. And that it was just really great. So to see it, and then just to see the pictures, people pass away and then you're like, oh my gosh, there's my grandpa. So it was really overwhelming. And it was really kind of a light in the last couple of months for our family to see that. So we really thank you for publishing that. And yes, it was a Google alert. So that's how I found it.
Yeah, I mean, we publish those kind of things. We never know where it's going to go, where it's going to be. That article actually went pretty far. I heard from the head of the LAPD police union. I think I heard from a guy in the Hispanic Coalition. I think I heard from a couple of family members. So that was pretty cool. And we didn't know that, but it was published from the heart. And obviously I have a history about Rudy DeLeon. And I think kind of to set the stage and the foundation we're about to talk about, we want you to show you this video if you're watching us, so you can listen to the audio. This is an excerpt from our training, Courageous Leadership. So here we go.
You got to remind yourself of that. We talk about legacy. That's Rudy DeLeon, captain of Los Angeles Police Department, passed away in 2010. You've never heard of Rudy DeLeon. I have never met Rudy DeLeon, but I'm only standing in front of you because of Rudy DeLeon. My father grew up in Torrance, California. And I don't have a lot of specifics, but home life was not always optimal. Father in and out, right? And Rudy DeLeon went to high school. My father went to high school with Rudy DeLeon's daughter. And him and his group of friends and her group of friends, they would end up where Rudy DeLeon was. And I think they were just using the daughter to get to Rudy DeLeon, because Rudy DeLeon was then at the time a sergeant with the Los Angeles Police Department, and they just embraced who Rudy DeLeon was. Rudy DeLeon would spend time with these kids and invest in these kids and tell these kids stories, and they were just enamored by him. I'll tell you the type of leader Rudy DeLeon was. Joseph Wambaugh just passed away, the most famous police author out there. If you haven't heard of him, look him up. Centurions, Onion Field, they made Hollywood movies with him. But his first 3 bestsellers, he was a Los Angeles police officer. He was still on the streets. And he started writing these books, and they blew up. And of course, anyone that has tried to do something outside your job and something starts getting some traction, you would expect, Wamball started getting some flack from the admin. What's he doing? They come to De Leon. Joseph Wamball worked for De Leon, and they go, hey, this Wamball, you got to get this guy in check. And De Leon goes, you can just take that back to your office because he shows up for 40 hours a week. He does a great job, but he does all this off duty. Now, Wamball had to eventually retire with like 12 years on because he became so famous. People were like calling LAPD going, send Joseph out. Yeah, so it just wasn't working out for him. But at the time, he was the biggest of the big. In fact, when you look at police movies and police shows, Wamball influenced all that, right? It was no longer just the facts man. We got to the real nitty gritty through his writings. De Leon was Iwo Jima. He told these stories to these kids, and he spent time with these kids. My father would have never become a police officer without Rudy De Leon. His best friend would have never become a police officer without Rudy De Leon. I likely would not be standing here without Rudy De Leon, influencing my father to make my father who he was, who then made me who I was. You understand how legacy works. Rudy De Leon doesn't know any of this. Now, obviously, he impacted thousands. He started the PAL program. He started the boxing program. He impacted thousands of kids. There are Olympic gold medal winners from '84 that Rudy De Leon mentored. But he has no idea of this story, right? His name's not up in lights. Now, he did name a station after him. He was the first Latino commander, LAPD, and he's very well known there. But you don't know him. But his profession from coast to coast has been influenced in some way or another by Rudy De Leon. Rudy De Leon's son became a police officer, spent 37 years there. My dad's best friend spent 40 years in law enforcement. His son, who was my friend growing up, is still at LAPD. All of that legacy from Rudy De Leon, who was, if he could be here, would probably tell you, he would probably point to somebody else that influenced him. You have that opportunity. In the job and out the job.
Okay, Brandi, we're back, and obviously Rudy's story plays a prominent role in the leadership training we do. You don't know this, but that's actually the last section of the day. I sort of build things up, and I want people to remember things at the end of the day. People remember things at the early day and the last of the day. Well, we tell Rudy's story, then my father's story. It's the last two stories of the day. So he's a prominent figure in leadership training. And of course, you grew up around this, and I guess maybe you thought it was normal, but obviously Rudy was different. I can't imagine being minority in the 60s, and having to work his way through that. I believe he was the first Hispanic commander. So a lot of firsts back then, unfortunately, right? It took us a long time to have first in law enforcement. We're still working towards that. Just as a child, I mean, what was your thoughts about that as you saw this playing out live?
Well, there's a certain duality, right? Because like my grandpa was really larger than life. Like you have no idea. I mean, you do have an idea, but you can imagine as like a child, it really was like a larger than life person, in my world. So everything about him was really special. Like he had a secret knock at our door, which in hindsight was a safety issue, right? It was like a very, very like police thing, right? Like my grandpa had a secret knock that became our family secret knock, so that you knew that that wasn't a stranger and that was your family member, which I kind of laugh now, but it's like our secret family knock. And I cannot tell you enough about how like well loved my grandpa was, but not just from like from a law enforcement and from like an industry, so to speak, perspective, but there was a certain kind of magneticism that my grandpa had in the community that was really special. So, you'd go anywhere with my grandpa and, like all the city officials would know him, and police and law enforcement would know him, but then like the shopkeepers would know him, and he would know them on a personal level. He would know, oh, how's your son? Oh, how's your house? And he would know all these special stories. And looking back, that really, you talk a lot about legacy, and that made an impression on my cousins and I and my siblings in a way that is insurmountable. it's one of those things where, you know, you don't know at the time that like this is making an impression on me, but then you realize how you've led your life, and wow, this is like exactly, you know, whether or not, I mean, he was doing this, you know, he led by example at all times, but really that was really something that was so cool. Like, you know, you go to like, I remember we go to like a restaurant. There was a restaurant in East LA that we'd always go to called LAPD, and like he knew every single person there, like the busboy, this, that. And then he'd be meeting there with like, you know, someone really important from like LAPD. And that just makes an impression on you as a kid to really pay attention, you know, to be mindful and know who everyone is around you. And I think that's really important. So that was something that always really stuck with me through life, you know, seeing not just like how popular my grandpa was, but like how he was able to connect with everybody on like a deeply personal level. I think that was also super cool. And, you know, and in terms of like, you know, being a minority and living in these like two different worlds, you know, for obviously I don't present Mexican. There's a lot of like, you know, my dad's family is white, but I always kind of viewed it as my grandpa's superpower a little bit, like this ability to speak Spanish. Like I remember when we were kids, my grandma and grandpa used to take us a lot of places, and my mom would always laugh because we came back from riding with grandpa in his car, and we were like, "Mom, did you know that grandpa's radio speaks in Spanish?" Like we were like blown away, and then he would teach us songs in Spanish. And later, like in life, like I'm fluent in Spanish now, and I feel like it's a superpower, and that's something where again it goes back into like connecting with community, where I always kind of just learned by example with him, where the more you could connect with people, be it through language or just talking, you know, the more powerful that was in building your community.
I think
Cool.
it's so powerful. You said so much there. I want to unpack it a little bit. So what I
Yeah.
heard from you is there's no question that Captain De Leon had charisma. We talk about charisma a lot in leadership. I mean, you can almost look at his photograph and you know he's got charisma. And so that's exuberant. But it takes more than charisma. We have a lot of leaders with charisma that are not great leaders. They're kind of some evil maniacs, if you be quite honest about it. But he had not only the charisma, but he had the investment in people. I mean, those people don't know him because he didn't pour into them. He's spending hours meeting them, greeting them, talking to them about family. I mean, the time that he had to have spent with all of these individuals for them to years later know who he is and talk and be able to come up to him is, I think, something that's missing in leadership today, Brandi. And I want you to speak to that. So you obviously saw the output of that and the outcome of that, but this would have been tremendous work for him. Because, you know, you have a choice in law enforcement. You have a choice in any job. You can just go to work, keep your head down, do your job, go home. Nobody's going to ask you to go out and meet all the community people. Nobody's going to ask you to know everybody's names. Nobody's going to ask you to spend time with people. It's not part of the job description, unfortunately. He decided to do that, and I have to think it was his roots. It was the communities he was in, because he lived in this community. He policed in this community. Do you think law enforcement's missing out on sort of this, what Rudy did? I mean, this was before we had this term community policing and all these fancy programs and all these leadership programs. He just did it, and I think we got to be careful here, because it may come across like this is just natural for him. And I can guarantee you there were days he didn't want to invest this much into people. He was tired, busy, whatever, but he did it anyway. And obviously you as a child saw that output, which is tremendous. What do you think that's missing today? Do you still see that same level today in law enforcement, and just cut, nationwide? I mean, I think our whole country needs to hear this, not just law enforcement.
No, I don't see it as much. I mean, I live in Silicon Valley, so I don't see it a lot in leadership here either. But I don't see it as much. I don't see like a genuine kind of excitement around learning about people. I mean, I know our family's always had it, and I know that, like it comes naturally to my grandpa. Like it came naturally to him because we have a huge family. Like he's one of 5. And then of those 5, they all had kids, and our cousin network is huge. So there was this kind of baked in, like, we got to get to all know each other kind of thing. And I feel like there's not this genuine interest in getting to know people as much anymore. And I'd say that the thing that really kind of, and it wasn't with my grandpa, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to sit down and just chat with you. Like, a lot of times it was active. Like, one of my favorite stories is I was an adult and I was in a restaurant in Oakland, and I was sitting at a table next to Jerry Brown, who at the time was the governor, or maybe it just been just been the
I
governor.
think he was the governor, and he wasn't the governor. I think maybe he was the governor again. He did it a couple times. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was sitting next to Jerry Brown, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna say something, because he knows my grandpa from like parole board days.
Yeah.
And so I did, and Jerry Brown was like, oh my God, I loved your grandpa. We used to go jogging together. And Jerry Brown's wife was like, you jogged? And so that was like kind of funny, and we all had a laugh. But he to the point where it was like, it wasn't just like sitting down. It's like, well, let's find like an activity to do together and do it together. It goes back to like the boxing and the police athletic league and that kind of stuff. Like, where can we meet together in an activity that will not just like keep us active and be positive, like from like a physical
but almost
standpoint.
break the barriers down, break the communication barriers down.
Totally. So I think that's also like a really important aspect. I mean, my mom was a park director, my mom, Rudy's daughter, and that was kind of her vibe too, where it was like everything was like, let's do a game, let's do this. Like, and I think that's missing in a lot of communities. I mean, I know that's been important for me in building community, where, I moved to this neighborhood 10 years ago. I didn't know anybody. And to be honest, like, it wasn't very an inviting neighborhood. But then we started having block parties, and we all got to know each other, and we hang out all the time now. And from like a community safety standpoint, like, we like call each other when we think something's going on. We have this kind of bond, and we've really created a sense of community here because we just talk to each other. We have barbecues and we do things like that. And I think, obviously that's something that's part of my legacy, but I do think that's something that's missing, is just this, like, let's hang out, let's go for a jog, let's play baseball. Let's, I used to play a lot of racquetball with my grandpa. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you just described probably the biggest divide in America today. It's not politics, it's not ideas, it's not opinions. I think we all have much more in common than not, but it's the fact we don't take time to get to know each other, right? And you mentioned jogging, and I had an interesting comment after this article hit. LAPD Captain Anthony Espinoza called me, and he said, I used to go jogging with Captain Rudy De Leon and my father, Bobby Espinoza, who was with LAPD, when I was a kid. And I don't know, maybe it was his teen years, but he said that I guess every Sunday they would jog together. And Bobby and Rudy had been long since retired, but they would still show up and jog together. And Anthony described it. Of course, he's a very successful LAPD commander now. And I have to think, and he knows this, that Rudy De Leon laid the groundwork for that. So I know you heard the video earlier if you're listening, but my father and Bobby Espinoza are friends. I mention this because my father was quick to tell me that he wants to know when this podcast drops. Him and Bobby want to know when the podcast drops. So they were friends in high school, and they were friends with Rudy's daughter in high school. And who was that again?
My mom.
Yeah, your mom. I'm sorry, I got the generational tree messed up here.
No, it's okay. It's funny. Yeah.
And that they would go out and hang out at your mom's house, and sort of as a ruse to get to talk to Rudy. And Rudy would, but I tell you, I know I choke up and I keep talking about it in class. I'm sitting here doing it right now because it's amazing to me as a father or as a former police commander that you would just stop and take the time with your child's friends and just pour into them, right? Because here's how it works, Brandi. If you do this leadership thing right, you're spending all day doing that. You're pouring into your officers, you're pouring into your community, you're investing in people. When you come home, it's probably the last thing that Rudy wanted to do. And then my father has all these memories of just him telling all these stories. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Rudy was in the military, World War II, my father and Bobby went to Vietnam military. Your Rudy was police officer. They became police officers, and that's just the people I know about. You know, I'm a product of my father. Anthony Espinosa is a product of his father. They're a product of Rudy. I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of people whose lives were steered in the direction of positive change to give back to the community because of this one man. That has to, that I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you realize, but that has to almost be overwhelming to you, right?
I mean, it always is, like, you know, and again, like it's so funny. I remember Anthony when he was a kid.
Yeah, he was a kind of an ugly little kid, wasn't he? Don't I remember that right? I'm trying to think back because he visited me a few times as a kid. They traveled to my home in Arkansas as a kid because our parents were very close. But yeah, I remember him as kind of a goofy, ugly little kid. Am I remembering that right?
I don't want to say that.
I'm just messing with him.
But no, I remember we would all hang out. But yeah, it is a bit overwhelming because, like, again, like, it was such an insular, like, you know, our family was very close, and like my memories a lot are like, you know, going to my grandpa's on Sundays, and like after he went jogging, and then he'd still have energy to like play racquetball with us kids and swim and play games and not even want to hang out with the adults, like hang out with us. And it wasn't until we went to community things with him where it was like, oh wow, my grandpa's actually kind of a big deal. Like, you know, he was really involved in the boxing community. Obviously, we went to a lot of boxing events. There was a boxing gym in Carson. Flabella Chavez was a good friend of his. We used to go to a lot of, you know, boxing stuff there. And so at those things, you'd understand like the gravity of like, oh, he knows all these people. And then as I got older and as like, you know, I'll never forget, I was in the geography bee, the state geography bee in Sacramento at the time when my grandpa was working for the attorney general. And so my mom and I went for my competition, and we got this like incredible tour of the Capitol. And it was like everybody in the Capitol, of course, knew my grandpa. And then that was like when things really started to resonate. And that was like when I was in junior high. So yeah, I always knew, and it was overwhelming because people were so respectful. And again, magnetic, you know, always so excited to see my grandpa. You know, no one, I mean, I've never known anyone to not be excited to talk about him or see him. And I think that's an incredible trait for someone too. Again, talk about things not being like that anymore, but it's pretty rare to have somebody with a reputation and a legacy that is just so revered and people just really enjoy talking about them. So that's really exciting. I think that was really cool for me too. Yeah, just the way people, again, light up when they talk about him.
Well, I wanted to give our audience that's watching this just a little bit of example. I mean, obviously, the legacy is incredible, but I just want to give a quick bio. Rudy De Leon entered the LAPD Police Academy in 1947. He was one of just 3 minority cadets in that class of 135 people. He later became the first Latino commanding officer, the first president of the Police Historical Society, the first president of the Latin American Law Enforcement Association, the first Latino to have an LAPD station named after him. If anybody makes it to the Hollenbeck Police Station there in Los Angeles, that's named after Rudy. Please stop by and see what that has to offer. But you also mentioned he was very invested in the boxing community. I believe he started a boxing league for kids there, and he even trained some Olympic athletes. Kind of expand on that, what he did with boxing. Brandi.
Yeah, so he was a boxer. I think he had like a short stint in boxing in the Navy. My uncle always knows the history much better than me, but I know he did box for a hot second, and then he just loved boxing. Like my grandpa really was passionate about the sport, and grew up around it when he was a kid. And then when he was at Hollenbeck, he started a boxing gym in the basement to basically keep kids off the streets, you know, to give them a place to go, to train, to keep in shape. And then eventually that gym was the home of Olympic gold medalist Paul Gonzalez, which was, you know, a huge thing for Hollenbeck for the neighborhood, really.
Mhm.
And it was really, and then it wasn't just like at Hollenbeck, but then my grandpa also became the boxing commissioner for the state of California. So boxing was just like always a constant in his life, and being part of the boxing community was super important to him. Like growing up, there used to be a fight night at the sports, I think it was called the Sports Arena in LA, the LA Sports Arena, and on like Monday or Wednesday nights. And I remember we would go as kids, even though it was a school night. And my grandpa was like a pretty regular fixture at that because he was the boxing commissioner and would go to events. And then also, like I mentioned, we'll pretty regularly go to more community boxing events in the neighborhood. And it was just something that was, he loved to support. He loved the sport. And again, it keeps people active. It keeps people off the streets. It keeps communities thriving. It's a community, right? Like you think about different communities, and I think it's important for people to be part of communities. And my grandpa always found joy in the boxing community. And I think it was really important for him to proliferate that community. And so I was always really excited to go to boxing stuff. So that was really cool as well as a kid to get to go to that. Cause you go to school all day, you go to your sports, and then all of a sudden you get to go to like a boxing match at the sports arena. Like that's pretty cool, but I think, at the end of the day, like, again, being part of a community is important. And my grandpa creating that community within East LA, Boyle Heights at the time was really important and was really needed. So I think that's something that could be emulated to this day, not just in law enforcement, but anywhere, because that's something that's gravely missing.
Let's talk about East LA and that community. I mean, we're not talking about Silicon Valley in the 70s, so I don't want people to come across like, law enforcement today has this problem with it's either this or it's that. We're going to be just all community policing and no law enforcement, or we're going to be all law enforcement and who needs community policing? It's us versus them mentality. But I think that your grandfather had a great mixture here. I mean, the stories I've heard is he poured into people and he loved his community, but he also didn't put up with crime in his community. He didn't put up with people that were going to prey on his community. Can you speak a little bit to that?
I mean, I can't really speak to too much because I don't know enough about like his police years. I know more about like the
But that would be an accurate statement, what I just said, you believe.
Yeah. And also I remember at his service, I think one of my favorite things, I think it was Ed Davis that said this. I can't remember who it was, but it was a retired LAPD person who talked about it, that my grandpa would also do stuff where like, I think they had like a football game of like the police officers versus like the gang members. And like, he would do stuff that was like, so like in the gray area, but like kind of like pushed around like the gang members to a point where like they really respected him. And I thought that was like a great story.
You just mentioned something that I think is also missing leadership in, and because you're right, there's a huge gray area. Some of the greatest leaders out there push the gray area, just what you said. I bet he didn't get permission to put a boxing gym in the basement of the Hollenbeck station, right? He just did what was right. And today I'm seeing more and more law enforcement. Everybody's scared of their own shadow because there's criticism everywhere. And you have very few people that want to operate in the gray area. Hey, we can all operate in a policy manual. That doesn't really change lives, to be honest with you. But I think what you're describing with your grandfather is, yeah, I totally see where he operated in the gray area, because it would be hard to start a boxing league in any police department today without this liability for him and the mayor doing this. I mean, that's why we see so much inaction. And so long before his time, he was doing things that we now put, grants to, and we say are great programs and this and that. He was just doing it. He didn't wait around for it. And so I think there's something to be learned from that. So yeah, I mean, go ahead.
No, totally. And even like I have this picture. I think my sister's a social worker. Again, it's like this legacy of like, law enforcement isn't just, well, obviously my grandpa was law enforcement, but then it was like, criminal justice, and then it was, ombudsman, and I think like, for my sister, like what she gleaned from that, and part of the legacy is, you know, her being a social worker and building community where she lives. And by the way, she's like runs every youth program at her school, which is like, so my grandpa. She has this great picture I gave her of my grandpa when he was on the parole board, running, you know, within, I think it was Vacaville, they actually had like a 10K or like a marathon, and my grandpa ran it with the prisoners. And like, again, like you're saying, like, I don't know if that would happen today, but you know, it's a really cool picture of my grandpa running with one of the guys, and she has that in her office, which I think is really cool. Because again, it's like, you know, who would do that? Like, and then again, it's also like, again, getting to know people and getting to know where they're coming from. And I think that's like a really important thing in leadership as well, is like, where are people coming from? Like, what's their perspective, and how are we all going to meet, you know, so that we can move forward with whatever we're working on.
Yeah. And when we talk about gray area, you know, I know I've talked about this one story with him and Joseph Wambaugh. Joseph Wambaugh, obviously the great police author, but he was working for Rudy, and Joseph, when his first books came out, I guess he got really popular, but he was still on the job. And that made the brass, the administration, nervous. And I guess they were coming down to Rudy, who was his boss, you know, question him, who is this guy and what's he doing? And I guess the story I heard is Rudy put these bosses in their place. He didn't hesitate, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing. We need a little more pushback from some of the nonsense that comes at the top. And of course, that captain level is kind of the middle that sort of keeps those below them shielded from that. I think I would love for people to listen to this, Brandi, or read this, and just inundate the comment section with stories, because I know they're out there. We only have a small fraction of those stories, and I think it's so fascinating because everybody wants to write about legacy, everybody wants to talk about leadership, but it's very seldom that we are able to hold a man up who passed away in 2009 that people are still talking about on the tip of their tongue like it was yesterday. And I think most of us will never have that because most of us aren't Rudy De Leon. There's just, you can't replicate that sometimes, but I think we should all try to. We should all model that. And wherever anybody's listening or watching, wherever they are in their leadership journey, I think this is a model that you need to hold up. And I don't want to get off here without talking about the most important part of leadership, Brandi, and how much you know about it. But my theory, I don't think it's a theory, great leaders on the job are typically great leaders off the job. I know we talked about the community, but what about his family? Do you have any memories of how he led his family and your impressions of that?
Yeah. So again, I mentioned that he's one of 5. And I cannot tell you how close our, like, how fun, and the De Leon family reunions are something of legend, right? There'd be like hundreds of people, and it would be something of like epic proportions of games and kids of all ages. And, you know, my grandpa was basically one of the kids. He'd always be like playing the games. And I mean, everybody just really, really like had a blast at those. And again, like my grandpa would be right in the thick of it with the kids, I think, which was always really fun for someone that was like such a leader in the law enforcement community to have this chance to break and then be like a kid with his family. I think is like a really important balance, because that's like that work-life balance that we talk about a lot in life. And I think that was also really important in leading family, because, you know, everybody's like stressed out at work, and then all of a sudden you get to come home and you get to play with your grandkids, right? And you get to go like play. My grandpa, I'll never forget. Well, he bought us a camcorder, like when we were kids. Well, he bought a camcorder and was like, "Oh, the kids, like the grandkids can make movies." But it was like, no, my grandpa wanted to make movies with us, actually. So we had like a collection of movies that we'd make. He'd be in every single movie, like without hesitation, would be like, absolutely, like I'll be in the movie. And so we'd always joke that like he didn't really buy the camera for us to make the movies. He bought it so that he could be in them. And I think that's that like incredible, like, again, work-life balance that he had with like being able to be a leader at home that led with like joy. That I think is something that's really important, that I don't know, a lot of people I think are missing these days, is that joy. And if I can just say, I actually, I went, Steve Kerr, the coach of the Warriors, I went and heard him speak the other day with, he was in conversation with Sam Altman, who's a CEO of OpenAI, who was underwhelming. But Steve Kerr was so great because he was talking about the tenets of the Warriors, and he was saying how one of them was joy. And I was like, like people don't talk about joy enough.
Yeah.
And it made me think of my grandpa, because at every family event, my grandpa would be silly, and he and one of his brothers would always like play fight and, just kind of just be the class clowns, if you will, of the party. And I think we're missing a lot of that. So yes,
just look at you, just look at the downstream of this, Brandi. I guarantee you're still having the family reunions. You're still doing the things, and that's generational. So Rudy built that, and to me, that is unbelievable. Like, I mean, in 3 generations, maybe no one knows where that came from, but I bet they will, right? But that's where it came from.
Yeah, and I think for our family, it's so important, like the legacy aspect. Yeah. So at all of our family reunions to this day, we have like our family tree laid out that shows who everybody is, what they did. Obviously, there's like a whole section with my grandpa and his accolades. And then I have one of my mom's cousins was like he was a very well-known human rights person. He actually was like he was a human rights commissioner for the city of New York. He was the deputy mayor there. So the De Leons are like, we've got a lot of legacy there. So at our family reunions, it's really important for us to show that to all the generations and for everybody to learn. And that's not just with like my grandpa's, it goes a layer above. Like there's like a whole section of like, the story of how the family came from Mexico. My grandpa's dad was a cook at a restaurant in LA called Perino's, which was like a Hollywood, like, famous people restaurant. And like my brother still has the apron from my great grandpa cooking there. It's so important to us to like know that history. And also that was something we talked about all the time. Like my grandpa was constantly telling stories of like when I was a kid and then this, and, my grandpa grew up around the Coliseum, and USC is such a big part of my family history. And so, just telling those stories all the time, it's like second nature for me to know those. And I think it's important for people in general to always be telling their family stories, because younger generations need to know those. And also my grandpa was the best storyteller you ever could have imagined. Like my grandpa could tell a story about a dog crossing the street and make it the most exciting thing ever. And I think you're talking earlier about charisma. I think that's also, really fun to be around someone that can tell a story that way. And I also think you can learn a lot from that, right? As a leader, like It's important to be able to be a storyteller. And I think when you're around people that can tell stories like that, and what I think is really cool is I actually have old video and audio. We used to record our family Christmases like on audio. So I have some of those stories of my grandpa talking. And then I have a really fun old video of like these movies we're talking about. And then I have another one of like us just filming him talking. So wow. It's fun that we still have those. But again, I think a lot said there, but mostly I think what's important is to tell those stories of family. And it's something that's been passed down to me forever. And that's been so cool. And I love my family. And like you said, we're still doing the family reunions, and it's still important for us to tell those stories. And my cousin just took her kids to go to the police station. I think last year they went to Hollenbeck to his police station. So.
Well, Brandi, it's incredible, and I'll tell you on behalf of me and my family, I so thank your family, because I don't think I would even be sitting here talking to you if that influence wouldn't have happened. Your family shared Rudy with the world and shared Rudy with all of us, and And there's so many lives, thousands of lives have been changed for the better. I don't think we could ever thank you and your family enough. So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing those stories. We could talk all day about this. This is incredible. But what I want people to do that are watching and listening to this is just evaluate. You know, I don't think you're going to be like Rudy De Leon. But if you can be a fraction like Rudy De Leon, this world's going to be a better place. So thank you, Brandi, for being here. And thank you for watching. And thank you for listening. And just remember, lead on and stay courageous.